In 1972, John Chamberlain moved to Little Rock to work in development for then a small firm, Systematics. In 1975, he left to form his own firm, Arkansas Systems. I met John in 1976 when I went to work for Arkansas Systems. I was just a kid. John's worked in the technical and entrepreneurial community for 55 years. He founded Arkansas Systems, now Euronet Worldwide, a global financial technology company, and has been a board member or mentor to dozens of other startups. He co-founded the Innovation Fund program run by Windmark International and has coached in that program for the past 5 years. He's got a BS in agriculture engineering from Michigan State, a SM and operations research from MIT, U.S. Army Finance School, a summer at the university in Nicaragua, lots of UALR courses for fun, and a lifetime of experiences working with people around him. I've worked with John a long time, and he takes advantage of every moment. It is a pleasant thing to be around him. I guess with no further ado, we'll let John take over and talk to us about computing history in Arkansas.
Good morning. Well, we're, as somebody said earlier, the Academy of Computing is by its nature somewhat of a look back into the past, as everybody's got a career of 20 years or more. The members with the earliest histories in Arkansas go back to the 1950s. So we have a lot that's happened. And for several years, we've had a history project in the Academy to try to tell that story of how we've gone from the cards to the cloud, from Arkansas to serving the world. And we've had a committee to try to keep that story alive and share it with more people. I'm going to do three things today. Tell you a little bit about what's been happening with the history project, and then we'll do a story. And today it won't even mention FinTech, but it's a story about networking, databases, and disease tracking around 1970. Then the last part is how you can help. In 2021, we've built some partnerships, we've collected stories, and we've begun to collect materials for archiving, with the eventual goal being that there'd be an archive so researchers could come here, look at the materials, and that we can figure out how to communicate them better to the public so they know how deeply centered in Arkansas computing is. The partnership started with the Venture Center and the Little Rock Chamber, and talking with them, and then with the Central Arkansas Library System Butler Center. We got good encouragement from there and introductions to some people at the university in Little Rock. They have archives, and they have a graduate program in public history. And we're going to have a pilot in January to start looking at some of the materials that have already been collected. Hopefully we'll get some of you to produce some more. And then the long-term goal is this will become an area that people write about and research. There's already some Academy-related materials in the Clinton Library. So this could be a center of research and computing history, particularly on the application side. It's going to take a little money to pay for some graduate students. I think our January pilot will be about $5,000. UA Little Rock also has some courses in history of internet, history of technology, and we've already provided some materials to them. An example would be a paper on how assembler was used in FinTech. And then the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences, their newsletter has published several history articles in the last year and are open to publishing more. Collecting stories, we've this year done 10 hours of recorded Zoom sessions that covered things like early computing in the poultry industry in Arkansas, the roots of IBM in the 1960s, the first computer at Walmart, some individual stories. Donna Amos, who helped automate Peterson's in the 1960s, Herb Lair that we inducted last night, Jim Womble, and more. We've got some stories about development, installations, and other neat things that have happened. And several of the people have also written part of their history and provided us with newspaper articles, photographs, and other documentation that we can consider for an archive. Collecting the materials for the archives, as I said, has begun. I think the largest set that I know about at this moment is held by Elizabeth Glassbrenner. Louise Miller had collected a lot of systematics material, and I think it's in Elizabeth's garage at this point. Similarly, in my garage is a collection of Don King's system programmer materials, including some hardware. That's a 2311 disk pack there on the left. And hopefully the process can get these things out of our garage into a place that people can access them. I also have some Arkansas systems materials. And Jerry Blackburn provided some materials from the history of what's now UAMS. And as I said, Donna Amos has provided materials from Peterson's. That's a picture of her on the left at the console of a powerful IBM 1130, about a megabyte of disk and 8K of memory. And she automated the world with it and then became the first System 38 user in Arkansas. Up at the top is a picture I got a different way. That's of Ray Wilkes, who was one of the early people with computers at the University in Fayetteville. He's in front of the IBM 7040 there. And I got that from his second cousin, who I found through a genealogy search. So a lot of places with online search that you can get material. So that's what we've been doing the last year. It's beginning to get deeper into how do we collect and how do we preserve and how do we present. Little later, we'll get to a time when we want a general request for materials after we have the archive agreements. So in the meantime, don't throw away stuff. Look through your boxes and your photos and write up your memories. It doesn't have to be great prose, just save some of these wonderful stories. So now time for a story for today. If you think back, it's the 1960s. There's millions of migrant workers that move around the country with crops, a lot of them from Arkansas. I went to school with a number of kids that they were only in school from October through March. They obviously got behind. They were supposed to go to school when they were on the road, and that didn't always happen, or they didn't get placed correctly. A lot of lost progress. And there were no shot records, so every school they entered, they maybe got a smallpox vaccination. And some of the kids were reported as having calluses on their arms from the vaccinations. So a solution was proposed that there would be a migrant students record transfer system so their records could go with them. Again, 1960s, computers are small things, not very prevalent, but Congress appropriated money for this, gave it to, that's before the Department of Education, so to the Federal Education Agency at the time, and they asked states to bid on the development and operation of this national network. The bids came in from some of the expected places like California, but Arkansas also submitted a bid. The Arkansas Department of Education bid proposed using what was then the UA Medical Center computer, a CDC 3300. And I could be wrong on this, but I believe that was probably the largest computer in the state at the time. It had 81K of memory, but those were 24-bit words, so you could store 3, 4, or even 5 characters in them. They had 6 tape drives, 2 line printers, each of which could print 1,200 lines a minute, and they had disk drives. And for the day, these were pretty special. One of the disk drives was 175 megabytes, and the other was 839 megabytes, and that's over a gigabyte. And, you know, we put many, many gigabytes on thumb drives now, but there were few places with a gigabyte of disk storage in the middle 1960s. The CDC was used for research and education. I think we mentioned last night that branch of the university offered their first degrees in computational medicine biology by 1969, and we have an Academy member that graduated with that degree then, Paula King Norton. And that was the first steps towards what we have now with bioinformatics. The migrant student system would be something different. It would be a servitor, or more like what systematics was starting to do than what a university usually did. They bid and they received the contract. I don't know whether it was because they were the low bidder, they had the best bid, or whether we had a great congressional delegation at the time. But Arkansas got the contract, and this is the basic design, that there would be a central database. Schools would either do an original entry or they'd update existing records, and they'd get back to print out a multi-part form that had all the information in the database in it. And the school had one part, the student could carry another part to their next school. If they forgot, they could get another copy from the central database, and then they could update it. So pretty basic system, but you've got now a national database here in Little Rock, 1969. And you've got all these places that you're going to connect. Here's the database printed out. I've never seen a pre-printed form with more data on it. Had several parts to it. It's got the schools attended up at the top of it. The standard exams and test results go in on the left. The subject placements with great detail down on the bottom, and then medical information on vaccinations and any relevant medical conditions like asthma or diabetes there on the right. So a big memory dump. And this must have been a real booger to align on a line printer. I would not have liked to try to do that. Okay. Well, what about the network? You got lots of states that have migrant students, and the network was pretty big deal. It was not common at the time, and the clipping here is from Computer World, which was sort of the weekly Bible of computing in the 60s and 70s, the weekly newspaper. And this was going to be a hub and spoke model. Little Rock is the hub, and up to 300 spokes around the country using what was then the current technology, WATS lines, wide area telephone service lines dedicated. And the areas with migrants shared these terminals. So it became a little bit, again, like systematics data centers, where the data center might serve 40 banks, and there was batch paper transmission of inputs and then outputs back to the other locations. That's how this worked with a cluster of schools. So you've got a pretty big network here. And just for comparison, this is the internet at the time, the ARPANET. And it had 4 locations, and the migrant student system had 300 locations. So kind of a nice view of where networking stood around 1970. So the CDC had to be upgraded to have a communications controller. And I think the guts of it are in the background there, but they had a couple CRTs to work with it. And the terminals were teletypes. So these were teletype terminals that had keyboard and printer and paper tape readers and punchers. The paper tape could be taken to the central location and transmitted later. The paper tapes could be used to print. There was actually separate equipment to read the paper tape and print forms. That's Jerry Blackburn, who was an Academy member there in the photo. So the system ran for 30 years. And there's a paper on its operation. They successfully improved graduation rates for migrant students. And another little piece of the Arkansas story, an IBM 360 replaced the CDC 3300, which is another story about how that happened. It was because it had health records. It proved important in health. And you can kind of compare this with the disease tracking now. In some ways, maybe we did as good or better a job with this system. So again, an article from Computer World, an article from the San Francisco Chronicle, Computer Saves a Life. There was a girl in a migrant camp in California. Her test for TB came back after she'd already moved on, and her test said she's in danger, her life's in danger. And in 4 hours, using the computer system, they found out where she currently was enrolled and got in touch with her and treated her. So pretty fast response for 1970. Another example of a health case, there were children, several hundred children at a Florida migrant camp that were exposed to typhoid fever. There's an article about that too. And within a day or so, they'd located 225 of them using the migrant students record system. And then they found the others a little bit later. So that's our story of 50 years ago in Arkansas computing. MSRTS has produced several people that have become part of the academy. Joe Miller, who's deceased, managed the system. Jerry Blackburn was the technical lead. When it moved to the 360, Systematics did some of the contract programming, and Prakash Jalihal worked on that software, and met his wife, Ann, who worked at MSRTS. And then Jim Womble, I believe, is responsible for the IBM sale that replaced this. And I'll pause here after the story in case anybody's got questions about it.
John, this year, I think Jennifer Barrett also had some connection with that system prior to coming to Axe, and I recall. I knew Jim was involved. I didn't know exactly how, but I have some recollection that Jennifer Barrett, I think her last name now is Matsko, had some tangential connection to that.
I'll contact her, and I mean, there could be another dozen people. Yeah. This was a big project, lasted 30 years. Was the first of the big ed tech projects in Arkansas, followed by Impact and East and the Governor's Computer Science Initiative.
Yeah. Fascinating story, though. Thank you for sharing that.
Hey, John, one of the things that I've learned in learning more about this process through you was the importance of IBM's presence in the state that really put the hardware in place. You know, I think the way you put it is, had it not been for IBM's great sales efforts within the state of Arkansas and selling a lot of hardware, maybe some of this stuff wouldn't have bubbled up. I wonder if you might speak to that a little bit, because I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and one of the insights, I've gotten in the last year talking to people is that one piece of that was the salary structure of IBM. That IBM had a national salary structure. So if you hire an SE in California, they get paid the same as an SE that you hire in Arkansas. And so in Arkansas, the top engineering graduates and business graduates were excited about that salary. And it let you have a high-paying tech job that you could stay in Arkansas. And that made Arkansas IBM a pretty active place. And you can run down through it. Sometimes they did the coding. The first coding for Walmart was done by Roger Klein when he was a IBM SE. And you just keep finding more and more stories, like the electric co-ops. 4 or 5 small electric co-ops in Arkansas got IBM to write a package for them. And then they gave that free around the country, so that the standard for smaller electric co-ops was software written in Arkansas. But strong group of people hired into IBM, and then you start looking at who founded, who were the key people at Systematics, who were the key people at Axiom, and they came out of that IBM environment. And started our labor pool that I think is still a fantastic thing we have here. Okay, if there's not any more questions, I'll do my bit to get us on schedule. There are more stories to capture. Every one of you's got some of them. And I'd like to enlist you with helping preserve this history. And when we get a little further down the road, we're not going to be around to tell our stories, and we're not going to be able to communicate them and let people know that this is a pretty big thing that's happened. So I've got 4 asks. I really would like some people to volunteer to work on the committee that have an interest in this and or materials, and people to record your own stories, preserve your artifacts, and we're going to need to raise some money. And Eugene has indicated we can set up a fund like the scholarship funds that people can contribute to the academy, and we'll use that for preserving the history.
John, I think this should be, the history should be an outreach of the academy, frankly. No one else is going to own it. And I think, we're at a point of mortality that makes the funding of this thing nominal. I mean, if you're looking to raise $5,000 to get this thing off the center, I think we could raise that out of this meeting. But I think this ought to be a gift we give back to the state from the academy, frankly.
Yeah, there's a lot of interested parties. The chamber is very interested in the FinTech history, the history here in Central Arkansas, and I have visions that we'll have a wall downtown with a timeline on it. Maybe it's inside the Venture Center, maybe it's outside. But anyone that is interested, I mean, millions of dollars have been made out of computing in Arkansas, and putting a little bit of that back into the system to save the history and let school kids and everybody else know that this is as important in our history as the invention of the Bowie knife in Arkansas. But if you want to be interviewed, or you have people you know should be interviewed, you can either just let me know, or you can work with me to set those up and conduct them. We've done a couple of group interviews, like one of them with several IBMers, one of them with the people that took Systematics International. If you have anything written, write that up. If you have your clippings, your magazines, all of that stuff. And coming soon is going to be a quick form that I think Eugene will help get the word out about your place in Arkansas computing history. It'll be a Google Doc where you can just randomly think that we should remember that project, that install, my first computer experience, gather the who, what, where, when, and you could fill out one. If you've had a 50-year career, you can probably fill out 100. And from that, then we can build and get more stories and have timelines and go on from there. Even just what your first computer was is going to be interesting. For some of us, it was in college. For others of us, it was probably pretty close to the cradle. My daughter at 3 says that's when she started having a computer. And of course, she also claims she worked at Arkansas Systems filing cards at 5. So she'll have a couple of stories. Okay. And artifacts, just think about that. They can be lots of things. I've got a T-shirt from an Arkansas Systems company picnic in 1990 on with art by Robert Duffer. And whether it's that or business cards or photographs, newspaper articles, anything you've got, If you've got it in paper, the archivists prefer that because they can scan it better, they say. If you've got it digitally, that's great too. And I put up a couple things on the left. Anybody that used a line printer probably remembers line printer art, including the Mona Lisa. And the stretch of things that you can see, the Pride in Systematics Systems Development Division, we've got a needlepoint version of the logo there from 50 years ago, but lots of stuff that's available. And if you got any more questions or comments, we've got great stories to tell. There's, as far as I know, there's 2 computer history museums in the world. One is in the UK, and I've heard from one of the guys over there who wanted to know about ATM history. And the other is in Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area, but none of them focus on applications. And I think that's what our area turned out to be magnificent in, is taking these things as tools and solving problems, whether that was in retail or bioinformatics or cable TV or any other field. We made it work, and it worked in many cases, not just in Arkansas, but around the world. So, end of the story, end of the ask. But I hope to hear from some of you to either work with me or put a little money in the kitty so we can hire some people that are in graduate programs in public history. Probably several companies around have had corporate histories written by those people. I know Peterson's had one, but we may well end up with some industry histories and corporate histories out of this.
Fantastic job, John. And I love your stories. I think that we all have heard some of your stories and all enjoy them when you tell them. And I think it's this example story that you put up, I think is important because you can see kind of how simple the story is, and it's supported by a few important facts, and it makes a compelling story. I think we were all riveted to hear how it was going to come out and what really occurred and some of the information about that. So I think you put a good light on history today.